the affective subject in the face of the the absolute victim. And they are to, as he puts it, to support the victim until the victim is in a position to re-enter this dialectic. He talks about it's a remise en position de lutte dialectique, as Blanchard puts it there. Now, and that's one way of that's a more positive way, more hopeful way, and less agonised way of thinking about what Lévy is talking about in The Drowned and the Saved. Mm-hmm. That way, I mean, that's so the horror that Lévy is expressing in The Drowned and the Saved, which is, as you know, is a late work. The horror that he's expressing is precisely that he, as it were, in relation to the absolute victim, he finds himself in the position of, yes, the affective subject. We, the survivors, are not the true witnesses, as he says. Now, but he formulates it in that way, partly, I think, to, as you say, to introduce the necessity of a dialectical relationship between the drowned and the saved, which is then hugely problematic. It's hugely problematic because, exactly as you say, you have effectively at that point also a re-abandonment of the drowned in the elevation of the saved, preservation of the saved in all sorts of ways. And that economy works in all sorts of ways, which is exactly what he's drawing attention to. But again, this is the extraordinary courage of that book, as well as the horror. In the horror that he expresses, the extraordinary courage of that book is that if you don't establish that kind of a dialectic, then there is no call to responsibility on the part of the affective subject. Yes, then you just cut, and the drowned are the drowned. So it goes right the way back to Chris's question as well at the start. The risk of elevating the saved at the expense of the drowned, as it were, doubly sacrificing the drowned. The risk of that is posed by the necessity of any kind of attempt to take one's responsibility seriously, in as much as one finds oneself happily not in the position of absolute victim. Now, one further thing to say, though, is that it's also important, I think, to... This is why the Blanchard position is a good one, because the Blanchard position establishes a kind of shuttling between the two positions, between the effective subject and absolute victim, which means partly that the absolute victim is not, this isn't an absolute distinction, but there is a relation, it's a relation of non-relation, as Blanchard will say earlier in that book, but that imposes a responsibility, imposes a relation. The language of the of effective subject, absolute victim, gets us too quickly to a fantasy of precisely, of being able to abandon the other, precisely, as if the other were no longer human or no longer existent, to keep that a bit more open than that. And so the necessity, I think, is to attempt, and this is where it's interesting and useful, although neither of them necessarily would be very keen on this, to put, say, that Blanchard position alongside Rancière, and to see what Blanchard is talking about that as understandable, as a confrontational enlargement of what Rancière is proposing, and then you get this idea of a relay between the two positions, which is precisely a kind of a remise en position de lutte, if at all possible.
We'll have one final question.
I was just coming back to the what you said about not bracketing the term human because it's somehow short-circuiting some problems. But I was thinking, suppose like you substitute human for living or sentient, would that not be, well, in a sense, like opening up to thinking about other existences as well? For instance, vegetarians would say, oh, we don't eat animals because animals suffer. But then why would they not think that plants suffer as well? And as it strikes me that this hierarchy of like human, animal, and plants, right, seems to be founded upon the ability to suffer, or the ability to feel pain, like the animal or the being that can feel pain the most would be on the highest level or something. And why should that be the case?
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, it already shows a kind of valorization in the beginning, so if you
Yes.
could comment on that.
Yes, that's very good, isn't it? That's very interesting. Bentham, isn't it, who says that the question is not can they think or can they talk, but can they suffer? In relation to animals, presumably placing the distinction to the animal meaning. Derrida makes a lot of it in L'Animal que dont je suis. Yes, yes, and yes, really. As I mentioned, it is as soon as you define the human in terms of existence, and in this context, with Heidegger behind that and so on, then you get the question of the animal immediately. And I'm very, very happy for that to be the case. And to that extent, you know, I would be very happy to go through, they do a search and replace on this, and go through and replace human by sentient, and see what happened. I'm very, very happy to do that. And not at all unhappy about the prospect of having then to argue these political questions out with that in relation to that expanded field. Absolutely. It is true, though, that for now, the name human does kinds of work that the term sentient being doesn't do yet. Now, you know, that's why early on in this I included the parenthesis for the time being, perhaps. If, you know, in some years' time we're having this discussion in a world in which what we're talking about is sentient beings rather than human beings, then good. I'm not sure, yes, and then do we have the argument about then it's living. And then it's living and non-living. Deleuze is no help at all, you see.